So I've served at the commission now since 1995, and I've held various roles within that. And during that time, some of those roles included strategic partnerships with CMF, like Michigan Cares. So I directed Michigan Cares for a couple of years. And most recently, I've been the executive director now for 2 years. So the commission was created in 1991 by Governor Engler and First Lady Michelle Engler. And it was really two people, I think, that really inspired them to create it. It was Russ Mobby from the Kellogg Foundation, who had already created the Michigan Nonprofit Association, who said he was always a big believer that there was a three-legged stool, and so the government played a role, as well as the nonprofit sector, as well as the philanthropic sector. And so he felt like it was time for the government sector to step up and be active in making change in communities. The other person who was instrumental was Governor Romney, who actually came to the Englers and said, this would be a great thing to do. He was a big advocate for volunteer centers nationally in the volunteer sector, and said it would be important for Governor Engler at the time to really create an office that would really be focused around volunteerism. So the commission was created about 2 years prior to the creation of the Corporation for National and Community Service. At the time, there was a small federal initiative called the Commission for National and Community Service. And so when President Clinton was elected, he had this big vision to expand service all over the country, and he created AmeriCorps at that time. And when he created AmeriCorps, that's when the corporation was really formalized, and he merged 3 federal offices, a White House office, Action, and this commission together to create the Corporation for National and Community Service. And so really, Michigan was well positioned because we already had a commission in place to really take advantage of these new federal dollars that would be coming into our states, where other states were just having to sort of quickly pull together and create a commission on community service during that time. Some of our founding commissioners, like Dottie Johnson, obviously was the president and CEO of the Council of Michigan Foundations. So she was one of our founding members. We've also always had funders. So Julie Fisher Cummings, who was also very active on the CMF board and a philanthropist in general, was one of our founding commissioners as well. We had folks from the Kellogg Foundation, the corporate sector, have always been represented, and then strategic nonprofit organizations as well have been represented on our board.
And how do they get on board?
They are all appointed by the governor. So depending on the time, which governor is in office, they appoint about a third of the board each year. Mrs. Engler, Michelle, was our founding chair, and she served as the chair for 10 of the 12 years that they were in office. And she felt so strongly about the commission and the work of the commission that she stepped down 2 years before they were term limited, because she wanted to ensure a smooth transition, and she really hoped the next administration would embrace the commission as much as she and Governor Engler had. And in fact, that worked. So Russ Mobby was brought in to be the interim chair, and he served as our sort of transitional chair for 2 years and was really instrumental in helping us successfully transition to Governor Granholm and First Gentleman Mulhern. And First Gentleman Mulhern carried on the tradition that Michelle started by having the spouse of the governor serve as the acting chair of the commission. I've served as the CEO for about the last 2.5 years, and I served as the deputy director prior to that. So I joined the staff in 1995 and served in a variety of positions. And it became a time when, at the time, Dan Mulhern asked me if I would move from deputy director and accept the CEO position of the commission. And I was happy to accept that and looked forward to the opportunity to really lead this organization. I think we've been a leader ever since we were really created. I mean, just to be candid, at the time that the commission was created in 93 when the legislation passed, I was actually working in Governor By's office in Indiana, and we actually had to create the Indiana Commission for National and Community Service. And because Michigan already had one, who do you think we called? Of course, we called our neighbor state at the time, and went up and visited and looked at their commission and how it was structured. And so it really served as an inspiration for what we tried to create back in Indiana. And as a result, I got to know the folks in Michigan, and they said, hey, why don't you come to Michigan and start working at the commission? So I joined. So I think that's just an example from the very beginning how Michigan has always served as a leader. We have state commissions have an association, a national association, and one of the former executive directors served as the chair, and I actually currently serve as the chair of that national association as well. So I think Michigan has always looked to for the ongoing leadership around service and volunteerism. So Vista and Senior Volunteer Corps, we have less of a role because the corporation state office, which is based out of Detroit, really takes the lead on those two. So AmeriCorps, Learn and Serve, and Michigan Cares. And then we have a new one. Our most recent one is called Volunteer Michigan, which is a partnership with the Volunteer Centers of Michigan. We look at service as a strategy and have for many years, and how do we use service and volunteerism to address some of our some of our toughest challenges in the state. And we've used AmeriCorps in one strategic way. So we place individuals, they do a year of service in a nonprofit or it could be a government agency, and in exchange they make a stipend, and then they receive a small stipend, and then they receive an education award at the end of that. But these individuals are addressing some of Michigan's biggest issues: foreclosure, homelessness, the kids who are not performing in school, both either on the far end, meaning they're about to drop out, or on the very beginning end, and making sure that they have the literacy skills that they need to be successful in school. So it runs the gamut. We're focusing on the environment, those kinds of things. Often, many foundations across the state are partnering with us because there are some match dollars that are needed at the local level to actually receive these grants. And so many funders step forward and provide much of that match dollars at the local level in order for us to be able to leverage these federal resources. Successes, I would just say, is that we're producing a whole culture of individuals who are very civically minded. So we know that after 1 year of full-time AmeriCorps service, people tend to go into jobs that are in the nonprofit or public sector. We also know that they tend to stay in the communities where they served, which in a time in Michigan when we've lost so much of our young talent, this is a program that's actually trying to retain young talent in our state. And we know that these individuals continue to be very civically involved, either through volunteerism or even some go on to seek elected office. So we know that, in each year we're graduating between 11 and 1,200 individuals through this year of service. So in the history of the commission, over 20,000 individuals have served, have done a year of service through AmeriCorps. And so we know we're really helping to contribute by producing some really talented individuals who are in communities now who are continuing to make a difference. We've actually partnered with the volunteer centers, I would say, in a couple of ways. So one, Michigan Cares was really one of our first initiatives that I would say really looked at volunteer infrastructure at a community level. And so that was an initiative between the commission and the Council of Michigan Foundations. And we asked community foundations to really serve as a neutral convener to assess the volunteer infrastructure in communities and to think about putting a plan together for how communities might better be able to leverage some of these new federal dollars that were coming down the pipeline. And what we found out of that process, and in some cases, some of the strongest volunteer centers that we still have actually were developed as a result of the Michigan Cares process. So Volunteer Muskegon, Resource Genesee, which is the volunteer center in Flint, were products that came out of that because the Community Foundation, the United Ways, the other groups came together to say, what is it that we need to put into place in order to be able to take advantage of these resources? And so that really started, was one of the most successful projects, I would say, that we did with Volunteer Centers of Michigan. Most recently, there's a new pot of money through the Serve America Act that was passed called the Volunteer Generation Fund. And we are partnering with the Volunteer Centers of Michigan to actually strengthen volunteer centers to really develop a model program of how service can be used to address either a public safety or a public health issue. And also we're looking to enhance the technology of volunteer centers all across the state. So we're providing small mini grants to the volunteer centers in order to increase and take advantage of some new volunteer technology that's going to make a huge difference in the way people can access, both in people who are interested in volunteering and nonprofits who actually want to post volunteer opportunities. So we're really excited about that. Then the other initiative that we had that I would be remiss not to talk about is our volunteer investment grants, which was actually an endowment building program that was funded by the state of Michigan and the legislature to help volunteer centers actually create an endowment fund. And so that lasted for about 10 years where we worked, and volunteer centers provided either a 2-to-1 or 1-for-1 match, and those dollars were endowed in community. The match dollars for those grants were endowed in community foundations all across the state. And so volunteer centers now have a small pot of money that's helping with their overall sustainability. Well, I think that institutions, I mean, we all have our roles to play, and I think we're sort of really clear about what it is we're in charge of doing, and we try to stay in our lane, if you want, for lack of a better word. But the relationship is absolutely essential. We couldn't do the work that we need to do without the Council of Michigan Foundations, without M&A, and without the Johnson Center. And so they've just been instrumental, whether it's funding that we want to do, whether it's programmatic things that we want to do. Michigan Nonprofit has always been a great partner of ours in either helping incubate new initiatives that we're trying to incubate, partner in terms of expanding because of the many affiliates that Michigan Nonprofit Association has. So with Michigan Nonprofit Association, the affiliates that they have, the Michigan Campus Compact, the Volunteer Centers of Michigan, those are all integral programs and partners of ours in the work that we do around trying to expand service and volunteerism around the state. And so we work with them on a variety of things, from days of service to increasing volunteer infrastructure and community. So they have just been an absolute essential partner in our work. And the Council of Michigan Foundations, of course, has provided ongoing important resources or helping to leverage those resources, whether it's for match dollars for AmeriCorps grants around the state or other initiatives. I mean, Rob Collier and Dottie, and his predecessor Dottie, were both instrumental, and Rob serves as the vice chair of our commission board, and he has just been instrumental in helping shape where the direction of the commission and how it fits in the larger picture of both funders, as well as instrumental, and even the relationships with the governor's office, because Rob has really positioned the philanthropic sector really carefully and strategically around some of the governor's initiatives. Yeah, I think it is. I think part of it's just relationships because, I mean, strategically we're all connected in some way. I serve on the M&A board. Kyle Caldwell, who's the head of the Michigan Nonprofit Association, is my former boss, as he served as the executive director of the commission a few years ago. So obviously I know Kyle well and served as his deputy for a number of years. So I think it's the relationships that makes the difference. I mean, I think our organizations are strategically positioned in a way that the relationships are there. But it has to be more than relationships, though, because obviously people move on to other things. And so how do you have some institutional connections? And I think through the Connect Michigan Alliance Fund and other things, we've been very strategic to create not only the personal and professional relationships, but some institutional connectedness that will continue always. I think it's been very intentional. I think from the founders who thought about creating the commission and all Michigan Nonprofit Association, I mean, I think, quite frankly, Russ Mobby is probably the most intentional and the one who has really shaped what our relationship and our organizations look like. And today still influences that, right? Russ served on our board for 12 years. He just recently left our board. We were sad to see it, but we certainly understand he's ready to move on to his own retirement in whatever way he wants to do that. But I think absolutely they're very intentional in terms of how connected our organizations are. Well, I think first there's this vision, right? I mean, there's always this larger vision and always willing to take a leap of faith and do something that nobody else has ever done. So we did that with the volunteer investment grants. We did that with a number of issues where the Connect Michigan Alliance, which was the $20 million endowment fund that was created. I think Michigan has always been bold in terms of not being afraid to try something. And not ever being sure if it will work or not work. But I think that having that vision and being bold is really important. I also think being collaborative has been so incredibly important. I think we all realize none of us could do this work alone. And so I think each of us as leaders of the organization certainly recognize that we have to go out and find the correct partners, whether that's the ones we're mentioning on this as part of this initiative or others, that it takes more than just us as individuals and organizations to get the work done. And so how do we bring more people together to get it done? And I also think, how do you bring people together and raise the issues and help convene folks around key things? And so people are understanding. But I also think it's about watching and staying in tune. I think you have to have a certain amount of political savviness, because in this work around the nonprofit sector, there's lots of things that are happening in the government sector that have tremendous impact on the nonprofit sector. And so you have to be connected. You can't can't turn your eyes and be blinded to what's happening in the government sector, because there's a lot that's impacting the nonprofit sector. And so, it's being able to do all of those things that really makes a huge difference. There was a time when there was a conflict. I think, as always, there's, nobody, we don't all live in this perfect world where there's never going to be issues that come up. But I think it was that leadership came to the table and really looked at the issue. And members of the board, it wasn't just the CEOs of the organization. So members of the various boards came together to look at the issue and come out with some recommendations that at the end of the day, the organizations were able to accept.
And they were okay with it. I mean, didn't continue on as a
Exactly.
was done.
Correct. I think that folks have used that power very strategically. I don't think that that power's been abused in any way. I think that power's been used to really lead an effort to have such a strong nonprofit sector and a strong volunteer sector in our state. I think so people have used that power very strategically to advance the cause, not advance themselves, which is a difference. I think the economy obviously had a tremendous impact, and we're going to continue to feel that for the coming years. Obviously, in the government sector, we've seen our state resources diminish. So we've seen a significant cut. We received a 50% cut to our general fund investment in 2008, and thank goodness we've sort of maintained level funding since then, which still in these cases is actually success in these times. But I think that had tremendous impact because with the crash of the market and all of that, I mean, unfortunately, even foundation investments are down in our state. And so at a time when the social needs are extraordinarily high, we unfortunately, there's less resources within our state to really address and solve the problems that we're faced with. But I think we also know that there's not enough money ever to solve all the problems. And so it's only when people roll up their sleeves and are also contributing where we're actually going to be able to really solve some of the huge social issues in our state. He was really, I would say, the grandfather of the volunteer sector, at least certainly in Michigan, and had huge, tremendous impact nationally even. He was the one who believed in the volunteer centers and thought every community needed a volunteer center where people could go to find out how to be involved in their community. And he pushed. He's the one he created a national association for volunteer centers. He was instrumental with the creation of the Points of Light Institute, which then became, really the umbrella for volunteer centers over the long haul. And so he just totally believed that every community needed and should have a volunteer center, and we should find ways to make sure that happened. I think people are always intrigued with how Michigan does it, and then I think people think, well, we could never do that. And I think that's not true. I think people have to have a commitment and a vision for how to get it done. Whoever thought, when we think back of all the things that have happened here in Michigan, who would have thought that we would have leveraged $10 million from the state many years ago to be matched with $10 million from the private sector to create the Connect Michigan Alliance. And then even the merger of Connect Michigan Alliance with the Michigan Nonprofit Association. There's lots of things that have happened, but it's been that vision that has kept people at the table and committed to making sure that it gets done. And so I think if other states wanted to do this work, they could do it. They just have to know what their vision is in order to get it done and make sure that people are truly committed. And it will happen. I do agree that we are unique. We have more volunteer centers than any other state. The number of foundations that we have, including community foundations, there's no other state like it. But it was the vision of Russ and others who really made that happen. And so if they can find the Russes in their own state to make a difference, they could clearly replicate some of the tremendous things that we've been able to do here in Michigan. I think, absolutely. We need more mentors for that, because I think, and it's been places like the Johnson Center that are actually, I think, really mentoring some of the best talent that are coming out into the nonprofit sector and hopefully government sector as well. But we need more of that. We see the passion through our AmeriCorps members, these individuals who are graduating, who want to make a difference, and we've got to find the right sort of pipeline for them to get them into communities, into positions where they can truly make a difference. But I think incubating that talent is extraordinarily important. We have to find new and other ways to do that as well. So I actually grew up in Indiana, was attended Catholic school, and so in my early elementary years, and even from that day was really involved in service learning back in the day before it was even called that. And so I specifically remember in the 5th grade, I led a project where we were recycling newspapers to raise money for the local humane society, and we were able to donate that money and see a difference. And we worked with our 5th grade teacher to really pick that issue and figure out how we wanted to raise money to do it. So I think way back then I started beginning to think about how you make a difference in the world. And then as I went on to college, I went to a small university in Indiana that had a tremendous focus on community service. DePaul University. It has tremendous service learning and incorporated into the academics. And so I just continued to make a difference. And when I graduated from college, I had an opportunity to go work for the governor's volunteer office in the state of Indiana under Evan Bayh, and was mentored by a woman there named Judy McKillop and Sharon Hunt. And really, at that time is when the 93 Act passed to create AmeriCorps, and every state had to create a commission in order to administer those AmeriCorps funds under President Clinton. And so Michigan had a commission, and so I got to know the staff of that commission, and we really studied why they had created their commission back in 91 and its purpose, and really used that as a model for creating the Indiana Commission. And so in getting to know the Michigan folks, I saw what tremendous leaders there were in this state. Not that Indiana didn't have great leaders, but at the time, service and volunteerism was just forming there. And I thought I could come to Michigan and really learn from some tremendous leaders like Dottie Johnson and Russ Mobby and Michelle Engler. And so I decided to join the staff and come to Michigan to really learn under some of the most, I think, thoughtful and successful leaders of the nonprofit and volunteerism field. Well, I think there are many individuals from my generation who want to make a difference, and the commission is a great way to do that. Although we really serve as a large funder for service and volunteerism, at the end of the day, we're seeing the impact that we're having, whether it's a public safety issue in the inner city of Detroit, or an education issue in Detroit, or an environmental issue in northern Michigan. The impact that we're having is tremendous, and it's a great way to see to use your talents to make a big difference, like in a state like Michigan. I think it's the people and the culture. I think that Michigan has just had this culture of rolling up their sleeves and wanting to help and contribute in some way. And so I think that culture, you don't always find that in other communities. And whether you're in the Upper Peninsula or in Detroit or, Benton Harbor, people want to make a difference. They want to live in communities that are vibrant and healthy and safe and producing, healthy kids and educated kids. And so people are always looking for ways to help and contribute to make sure that their community is the best community it can be. I think it's a variety of things. I mean, I think some of it is driven through faith. Obviously, there's a strong connection to service. And so for those individuals who have that faith connection, I think that certainly contributes. I think families too, depending. I mean, I think often there's a member of a family who's really bought into this idea of service and giving back. And I think that can have a tremendous impact on generations of individuals from that family. But I also think our schools have had an impact. Schools have always had, some schools have a community service requirement. Others have gone more stringent and have connected service as part of the curriculum through service learning. So I think there's a variety of ways for which people are being inspired and encouraged to contribute and act and be part of making a difference in communities. For me, it was school and family and church. I mean, a combination. As I said, my early education was Catholic school, and so of course service was an important component to that. And the schools I chose after that had strong service components. But even my family, we were always. I remember my parents volunteering for every committee at school and leading the fall festival or leading some other group at church, and so very active and just created the expectation that. When you've been given a lot, you're expected to give back. And, so I was very involved in high school through the president of our student council. So always looking for ways to kind of lead and give back and help make a better environment for our school. Yeah, because I told you the story of the 5th grade and the service project, and I was the leader of that project and asked by my teacher to do that. So I think throughout my schooling, I was always involved in a leadership position, serving on student council, being the class president, those kinds of things, and always felt, I guess, comfortable in that role and excited to be in that role in order to make a difference. Like I said, to have people's educations be better, to have more activities or opportunities for young people, school, when we were in school, those kinds of things. I think that it's important to do something that you're really passionate about. So if you want to be a leader, I think everybody has leadership qualities. I don't think that means if you weren't a leader in fifth grade, you can't be a leader. I think people have to find the leadership opportunities that they're most comfortable with, and sometimes that's in their professional life, and sometimes that might be in their personal life through volunteering and just taking a lead on a committee or a group. I think people have to find what's most meaningful for them and what they're most comfortable with, and when they do, they'll be absolutely successful with it. There's a lot more I want to accomplish at the commission before I think about my next position. But it will be somewhere here in Michigan. There's too many opportunities, too many tremendous organizations. I don't see myself ever leaving this state. So it'll be an opportunity here. Potentially in government. I found my passion in government. The commission is within government, and I think there's a real role and there's a need for real leadership in government. And so it will most likely I'll remain in the government sector in some way, shape, or form. I have young children, so I have two sons, 4 and 6, and so it's fun because I'm now at that stage where I'm being asked to serve at their school and do a variety of things. So I look forward to those opportunities. I've also been a big sister now for about 8 years, so I mentor. I'm on my third student, but I mentor a 4th grade boy, and we do lunch once a week together, and I mentor him because I think it's important. I also think that you shouldn't ask others to volunteer if you're not willing to do it, and leading by example is extremely important. And so I look for the ways in which I can be connected and volunteering and making a difference in my community on a regular basis. My staff, there's a number of young folks on my staff that I obviously serve as a mentor to, in hopes that I'm creating the next generation of really talented leaders that can go into either the government sector or the nonprofit sector. And then through AmeriCorps, I have the opportunity to interact with some of our AmeriCorps members throughout the year. And so although I don't mentor them, I would say formally, it's great to just have the opportunity to listen to their story and really encourage them to think about how they continue to make a difference. And then nationally, I'm often, because I've been at the commission for a number of years, I often am asked to mentor new executive directors of state commissions around the country. And so I, of course, always agree, because I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't been mentored by some tremendous individuals. So it's interesting to have those conversations with a 4 and a 6-year-old about how to make a difference and to be thoughtful about how fortunate we are and that we need to make it, we need to give back in some way. And so we have those conversations and we have those moments, and sometimes they're actually funny conversations because the reaction of a 4-year-old when you're trying to have a serious conversation isn't always that. But we talk about that. We talk about how people don't have food, how people are in this times without clothing, don't know where their next meal is, and ways in which we can make a difference. And I encourage my kids to be thoughtful about how they can be helpful with those individuals. So I try to get them out on days of service and to be part of some of the things that I'm part of so that they see the bigger picture. So we participated in the river cleanup in Lansing last year, and they enjoyed it. They, though they don't totally understand why we're doing it, they still, being out there is just enough. And I think enough of those opportunities, and they'll be future AmeriCorps members. And I talk about mentoring Jacob, my 4th grade lunch buddy, and they are very interested. And so I took a picture of him, and so they could see what he looks like. They're very interested about what I do with him and why. And so we have those conversations at dinner sometimes.